Welcome, everyone. This is our second part of our For Love series by C.S. Lewis. Tonight, we're going to be discussing Eros. So, up here on our panel, we have some of the lovely couples of our young adult group Tyler, Anna, Mike, and Mary, who recently got engaged. Yeah, yes. And we have Elizabeth and Stephen. So, they're going to be sharing with us. And we have Phil Tran from the Culture Project with us moderating. And he will be leading discussion and prompting the couples, trying to get some insight from them. And you'll also get to know future, if you're new here, friends. And yeah, everyone enjoy.
Hi everyone. As Maria said, my name is Phil Tran. I'm from, actually the easiest way to kind of like remember like what I'm about, I guess, is my name is Phil. I'm from outside of Philly, and I studied philosophy, so that's like a triple threat. I also studied theology as well. It's really humbling to be in the presence of Dominicans. I tell people if I was just starting religious life still, I'd be a Dominican. Let's see. So tonight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give an overview of C.S. Lewis's chapter on Eros, so just so that we kind of like know kind of the common points that we are going to be talking about in the panel and whatnot. I'm going to flip it over to you guys just if there are any questions about what's being covered. And then I have like a bunch of questions for our panelists. I don't know if we'll get to all of them. Yeah. And then we will also have time for everyone here to ask questions too, because I'm just really hoping that this sparks a lot of good conversation about what the nature of love is. So I was asked to do this by Mike. He's a good friend of mine. I wasn't sure if he asked me because he knew I studied philosophy and theology, or because he knows I am a hopeless romantic, and I love talking about the nature of love. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. So it's really nice to have an outlet for it. So we'll start with the introduction of the book. So C.S. Lewis begins by talking about how there are two different types of love as he's kind of found, as he's entering into the idea of God is love. So the first one is gift love. The example he uses is that love which moves a man to work and plan and save for the future well-being of his family, which he will die without sharing or seeing. So we get the impression it's very altruistic. And then the second type of love that he talks about is something called need love. And he defines this by saying, that which sends a lonely or frightened child to its mother's arms. We can almost kind of presume that it comes almost out of like a deficiency, or it really isn't the total like gift of self. It's not that altruism that we see in gift love. He further on goes to say, I still think that if we all mean by our love is a craving to be loved, we are in a very deplorable state. So what he's saying is, it's a good thing to desire love, to feel loved, but it is a greater thing to want to give love. But on the flip side, he also says, but not to feel need love is in general the mark of the cold egoist. And for like a long time, like over 2,000 years, the philosophers have said that we are social creatures, that we need community to survive, to enter into the fullness of human thriving. And the Bible echoes this, right? In Genesis 2:18, it says, it is not good for the man to be alone. And furthermore, we can desire and really strive towards gift love, that gift of self, but it isn't possible to maintain all the time. Lewis says that, and if divine love is one thing, it is gift love, not need love, right? Because God, the substance of God, doesn't need anything to be completed. Rather, we are the products of the overflowing love that he has. This great love that it's so bounteous that it seeks to create others. And frankly, others, as in us humans and the rest of the created order, creatures that can choose to not love him, right? There's a certain vulnerability there. And I think one of the best quotes that I've found, one of the best pieces of the Vatican II documents is from Gaudium et Spes 24. It says, man, ... cannot fully find himself except through a sincere gift of himself. So we come to know who we are by giving of ourselves. Lastly, from what I'm drawing in the intro, man's love for God will always largely be need love. We can aspire to be like the mystics, who at times are able to give gift love to God, but that doesn't, it's intermittent, if anything. So now on the chapter on Eros. Oh, actually, sorry, first, I meant to ask you guys a question. My first question is, what do we say love is? Mary? Excellent, very good, very classic. Willing the good of other, as other, we might add. Anything else to add to that? Yes. Okay, cool. Because that is that's what Trinitarian love is, right? Okay, and then my next question for everyone is, what do we say erotic love is? If it's not contained necessarily in willing the good of another. Yes. Obsession, okay. Strong, spicy. What else? Yes. Very good. I like that. And Lewis likes that too, so we're going to get into that as well. What Lewis says, I think is very beautiful, pretty simple, but we kind of like need to parse out a little bit more. He says, Eros is that state which we call being in love, or if you prefer, that kind of love which lovers are in. All right, so it can be almost hard to describe, but we can kind of see what it is when we make the observation, when we kind of notice people who are in love. Oftentimes when people think of Eros or erotic love, and I think that this is largely a product of the fact that we live in a hypersexualized world, is that we think of merely sexuality, right? That which is sexually explicit. What Lewis has to say about that is this, is that sexuality is only part of our being in love. Sexual desire can occur outside of Eros, being in love, and Eros includes things outside of sexual activity. He describes, or what he names as that more just strictly what is sexual is Venus. He says that Venus is solely the carnal/animal element within Eros. So hopefully we realize that Eros does deal with passion, with attraction, as was kind of mentioned earlier, maybe in a particularly exclusive way. Yeah, but it's something about like being in love. And I think one thing I like about philosophy and how it's been articulated to me before is that it is simply describing what we observe in our lived experience. So when we find people who are in love, we say, well, what does that mean? How do we delineate that? He says, it isn't likely that we start with mere sexual attraction and then happen to fall in love. What often happens first is, quote, simply a delighted preoccupation with the beloved, a general, unspecified preoccupation with her in her totality. A man in the state really hasn't leisure to think of sex. He is too busy thinking of a person. The fact that she is a woman is far less important than the fact that she is herself. He is full of desire, but the desire may not be sexually toned. If you ask him what he wanted, the true reply would often be to go on thinking of her. He is love's contemplative. He says, sexual desire without eros wants it, that is the pleasure associated with sex and sexual activity, the thing in itself. Eros wants the beloved, right? It wants the person. It wants the individual that is being loved. The lustful person doesn't actually want the woman or man. He or she wants the pleasure associated with it. And I think one good way to articulate this, I wrote my senior theology thesis on spousal love, and I largely drew on what St. John Paul II says. And in his great work, Love and Responsibility, he warns us against use of the other person. And what happens in lust is objectifying the other person, simply seeing them as a means to an end, right? Once again, not seeking the person, but the pleasurable thing which that person can provide. Eros makes a man really want not a woman, but one particular woman. And to draw on just a piece of advice that one of my friends had given me one time, I was once just like going off about like like what I want in a future spouse. And I'm very idealistic. And this friend very kindly reminded me that we fall in love with a person and not an ideal. Lewis says, Eros thus wonderfully transforms what is par excellence a need pleasure into the most appreciative of all pleasure. In Eros, a need, at its most intense, sees the object most intensely as a thing admirable in herself, important beyond her relation to the lover's need. So what he is kind of getting at here is that we may have an attraction, but it turns into something more because often in Eros, what we see is we want to actually give of ourselves. Eros, when it's understood in, I think, the right and the most charitable way. And John Paul II articulates this as the personalistic norm. Once again, remembering that, and I think something that Lewis does here is when we talk about the object, in philosophy, the object is anything beyond the subject. I am a subject because I am taking in things, and everything outside of me is an object. And if we kind of stay in the realm or the idea that the other is always an object, we will be inclined to use them. So what the personalistic norm advises us to do is to remember that everyone else is a subject unto themselves, that they have the same needs and desires and hopes for fulfillment that I do. And as I mentioned, Eros oftentimes is associated with passion. So passion comes from the Latin word passio. And who can tell me what that means, what that translates to? Yeah. Yes, to suffer or to undergo. So oftentimes when we think of the passions, we think of emotions, and that's partially true. But the emotions are something that we suffer, something that we undergo. It's almost something inflicted onto us. So to be in love is likely characterized by undergoing fascination, infatuation, deep emotions, and strong desires. And I think some people, when they're trying to describe the experience of being in love in a very deep and profound and maybe even melodramatic way, we might say that we are inflicted by, or wounded by, or pierced by love. Lewis draws on Ephesians 5:25, and in the same thesis I wrote on Ephesians 5 in particular. He says, "Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church and handed himself over for her." All right, so that's from the Bible. Then Lewis says, this, and what Ephesians 5 deals with is the headship of Christ, because Christ is the bridegroom, and the church is the body whom he loves. Lewis says, this headship then is most fully embodied, not in the husband we should all wish to be, but in him whose marriage is most like a crucifixion. And further on he says, the chrism of marriage is not seen, quote, in the joys of any man's marriage, but in its sorrows. So what does that mean? The merits of a relationship oftentimes aren't apparent, truly, in simply being in love, because that's easy, right? Sometimes we don't even choose to be in love. But then when we are in love, we really start to stretch ourselves for the other. But once again, we don't see the clearest fruits of charity, of love there. But at the same time, this doesn't mean that we should seek out a bad relationship either. Who here is familiar with the prophet Hosea? Okay. Hosea was very interesting. He had a divine message from God to marry a harlot, okay? So he marries this prostitute, and he is just suffering and suffering and suffering out of love for her. And basically why he does this is it is an allegory for God and us, right? Is that God has this undying, faithful love to us, and we cheat on him all the time. That is actually the narrative of basically the whole story of the Israelites. It's a constant, faithfulness coming to God and then, building this golden calf and worshiping that instead, right? So we go through cycles, both like as the church, like at large, but also us individually. Lewis says, don't necessarily be like Hosea, because he also says we should not deliberately seek suffering in our marriages. Quote, yet it is nonetheless the persecuted or martyred Christian in whom the pattern of the master is most unambiguously realized. Eros does not aim at happiness. That is what Lewis says. And that's kind of interesting because we think that the pleasure associated with sexual activity or whatever is going to be what gives us that fulfillment. But he says that deeply, or like more deeply, Eros does not aim at happiness. Lovers cannot be convinced that their marriage or their ongoing relationship will be an unhappy one. This is not because they will disbelieve it, but because they cannot be dissuaded by such a truth. For it is the very mark of Eros that when he is in us, we had rather share unhappiness with the beloved than be happy on any other terms. He says, to Eros, all these calculations are irrelevant. Quote, better this than parting. Better to be miserable with her than happy without her. Let our hearts break provided they break together. If the voice within us does not say this, it is not the voice of Eros. He's telling us that Eros seeks something eternal and lasting and permanent. And this, I think, is also the folly of the cross. Christ is the highest bridegroom. And so much of what he does for us is beyond the limits of logic. It is beyond comprehension. His love makes no sense, yet it is good and it is holy and it is the way. We might know that Christ's passion started at the Last Supper and went until his death on the cross, which finalized his union to us. What were Christ's last words on the cross? Who can tell me that? It is done. Who knows what it is in Latin? Consummatum est. It is finished or it is consummated, right? So even Christ dying on the cross uses this spousal language to show how in love he is with us. Because when he died on the cross, that is what, once again, really finalized his union to us. When I think about what it's like, at least in my experience, to want to be in love, once again, it can be really strong and passionate and melodramatic. And something that I've kind of realized is when I think about how I want to be in love, I want to be consumed by the other, okay? Lewis says lovers would like to eat one another, right? What does that mean? And when I've tried to find a parallel for this expression of this desire, I came to realize, just probably a few months ago, it's the same desire that Christ has in the Eucharist, right? Christ longs to be with his bride so badly, he remains on our altars and our tabernacles. He becomes food for us. He becomes something that we literally take in and consume. And I think also it's the case that in our Catholic theology, that Christ's passion started at the Last Supper, where he instituted the Eucharist. And it is consummated with his death on a cross. And his passion is also, once again, an undergoing of love for us. And I think it is also incredible because what Lewis is saying is that Eros wants to promise a lot, right? But our feeling of being in love will not always be what drives us to love the other, right? Even Christ at the agony of the garden asks for the Father to take this cup away from him. But be it your will, the Father's will, not mine. And once again, that's just the perfect parallel for this deep love that Lewis is describing in Eros. So within Eros, so Lewis says, quote, within Eros of himself will never be enough, will indeed survive only so far as he is continually chastened and corroborated by higher principles. Further on, he says, he is notoriously the most mortal of our loves. The world rings with complaints of his fickleness. What is baffling is the combination of this fickleness and his protestations of permanency. To be in love is both to intend and to promise lifelong fidelity. And furthermore, he says, and yet Eros is in a sense right to make this promise to death. The event of falling in love is of such a nature that we are right to reject as intolerable the idea that it should be transitory. In one high bound, it has overleaped the massive wall of our selfhood. It has made appetite itself altruistic. tossed personal happiness aside as triviality, and planted the interests of another in the center of our being. Spontaneously and without effort, we have fulfilled the law towards one person by loving our neighbor as ourselves. Eros is driven to promise what Eros of himself cannot perform. John Paul II, in his Theology of the Body, part of the research I found when I was working on my thesis, he says this about Eros. We find in Eros we find the need for Eros to surpass itself. Eros seeks to fulfill itself by means of a further truth of love. As Eros closes its own horizon, another horizon of love opens. This love has been called agape. What this means is Eros kind of starts the process, but it's up to the work of charity, of agape, to continue the lifelong promise that is being made. Lewis asks, can we be in this selfless liberation for a lifetime? And in a very snarky British way, he says, hardly for a week. Even the best lovers can only maintain the state intermittently. They, and he's referring to couples who idolize Eros, expect that mere feeling would do it for them, and permanently, all that was necessary. Eros, like a godparent, makes the vows. It is we who must keep them. We must do the works of Eros when Eros is not present. We must choose sorry, this is me now. We have to choose to remain in love. We have to choose to do the difficult thing when it is no longer easy or spontaneous. We may not always choose to fall in love, but we do choose to remain in love. Love as charity, as agape, means willing the good of another as other. And this involves a free choice of the will to love the other. Lewis says, Eros needs help, therefore it needs to be ruled. And he says, this requires humility, charity, and divine grace. And this is, once again, so obviously apparent in Christ's passion. And I think for many of us who have kind of studied what the history of Christian thought is, will know that, particularly as Aquinas articulates, loving is willing the good of another. And I just kind of want to end on, at least this part, on one note, another piece of wisdom from that same friend earlier. This friend asked me, Phil, how do you know when you found the one? And I said, I don't know. She said, when you both choose each other, because love is a choice. Do we have any questions about what Lewis says? / what Phil says, / what JP2 says? Okay, great. What do we think of all that? Do we agree with Lewis? Okay, great. Couples. Feels like a game show. So I have a bunch of questions, and not everyone has to answer all of them. But what I wanted to do in this was kind of give, once again, like kind of the philosophy or the theology of Lewis, but then see what it looks like when it's lived out. Because we can all read books, but to have personal encounter with another is unique. And obviously, all 6 of these people have made the commitment to be with their beloved forever. Right? Well, until death do us part, right? Because then marriage is dissolved at that point. Sorry. So my first question for you guys, for whoever wants to answer, is how did you win over your beloved? / how were you won over by your beloved? Yes.
Hello. Hi. Yeah. So Elizabeth got me really good, actually. So the story of how we got together is kind of long, and I look bad in most of it. But what ultimately happened was that in a moment of confrontation where Elizabeth sort of said, Stephen, you've been kind of like you've been really flirty, but like non-committal, what's going on? I gave this really lame excuse, and her response was to go to prayer. And to me, I'm like, oh shoot, she's invoking God. And I thought to myself in that moment, isn't that what I would want the person I was with to do? And I was like, well, duh, yeah. So when we finished the prayer, Elizabeth, I think, has said that at that moment she was ready to like walk away, kind of sort of like she was done. Like that was her exit from the relationship. But we finished the prayer, and I asked her out for that evening because I was just like, okay, well, I can't let that one lie. So that was how that happened.
Another hot take. Well, not hot take, just like, I'm about substance. So these questions are very substantial. How would you describe what being in love is like?
Hey, what's up? Okay, so being in love, broad question there, I guess. What you said earlier, sort of about the continuous choice of being in love. So we're both going through marriage prep now. We've had exactly one marriage prep class, but our homework for that class was to watch this show on Formed, which you guys probably know is like Catholic Netflix. And one thing in this show, they're talking about like all these different aspects of marriage, but how you continuously have to say every day that I do every day, again and again and again. And even when it kind of stinks and you don't feel like it, like you have to just like, you keep saying I do. This is really a non-romantic way of answering this question. I realize now as I started. Sometimes I just talk before I think. But I think that is pretty accurate, that like the continuous choice of love is some days super easy, super like, it's like you just started dating again and like everything is just like peach keen. And other days, it's like you're each other's cross, and kind of knowing that, and I'm probably more of her cross than she is of mine, I'm sure. Like going in and having that realistic view of what love is probably essential to just being a functioning spouse or partner or whatever. Because I think that if you have that like idealized version of love, it really robs you of your ability to be actually in love. If you have this sort of romantic view of it, you're never going to live up to it. And I think that's what the Catholic teachings around love are really freeing, because they kind of free you from that idealized, abstracted version of love, and it makes it more about like a real person. And it's going to be hard sometimes, and sometimes it's going to be like super easy, but you always have to like come back and like say I do again and again. Yeah.
I definitely agree with everything you said so far. I think the only addition I would say is that it's easier to turn back than you think it is and to say I do. Like you put the pressure on the hard stuff there, and it's true, like you get on each other, but then I feel like I always turn around and I'm just like, man, why did I do that? Or like, why did I get mad? Like I just, I do love Tyler and I want to be there, and you want to say I do every time. And so it's not as hard to do it as it sounds. But yes, there's always like, it's kind of going through life together and really being there for each other, I think, too.
So Lewis says that attraction typically doesn't begin with mere sexual attraction, but with a preoccupation with the other in his or her totality. But as human persons, we are body and soul. So physical attraction is important. So many people note that their beloved becomes literally physically more attractive as we become more attracted to their personality. Was this the case for you? Whoa, quick answer.
I feel like we have to take this one. So if anyone knows our story or doesn't, I'll tell a real quick version. We met in high school as freshmen.
Like 11 years ago now?
11 years ago. Oh yeah. And when we first met, we probably were the furthest attracted from each other ever. Like we were good friends. We were best friends all through high school, and then honestly, I was kind of attracted to her most of the way, but. But I felt like we got to know each other really well on a deeper level.
We used to talk every day.
We talked every day as friends.
And we told other people that.
Yeah, all the time. And so that's something cool about our story. And then senior year of high school, I guess something switched and started dating, and that was our story, I guess. So, but yeah, that just kind of goes with the physical attraction. It was there, but it was all about the getting to know her first and getting to know each other. And we know so much about each other because of that. Like we know we're best friends, so that's
Yeah.
all I got.
Tyler and I routinely say this, but you kind of have to be each other's best friend first. And Tyler was my best friend, and he has been, since sometime in high school before we started dating, probably. And I think that continues in marriage.
In your experience, what role does vulnerability play in falling in love / remaining in the relationship?
I think that's been a big, big part of falling in love and being in love for me, and that's not something that I'm very good at. I like to be independent, so the hardest thing for me has been I guess we've also known each other for like 11 years now, and we'll have been married for 6 years on Sunday. But I think the hardest but the best thing about marriage has been that it's continually forced me to be more open and to share things that I didn't share before. Like, I never told people about my feelings before. And I've had to learn to do that over and over again with Steven, and sometimes like share the same feeling over and over again because I don't feel like the first conversation I didn't communicate it well enough, or maybe it didn't get through, and then also to try and encourage Steven to share with me.
Yeah, I'm pretty bad at that.
Yeah, well, we both are, so we both have gotten better at it over the years, and for different reasons.
Yeah, kind of going off of that, I think the vulnerability in sharing your feelings is a big point. Obviously, we're not married yet, but just being able to be self-aware of your feelings. And like, I know myself, I often want to like push feelings away, especially like bad feelings, and then I end up being angry or like in a bad mood and I don't know why. But rather than kind of lashing out at Mike, because, you know, obviously he's the closest person to me, being open about those feelings and whatever is, you know, going on in my heart rather than trying to like deal with it myself. I think that's a big part of being vulnerable.
When did you start? Okay, Eros aims at the permanent. So when did you start talking about marriage?
I don't know if I can remember exactly when we first started talking about marriage. I mean, it was years ago at this point, so my memory's not that good. But one of the like weird thing about like our relationship is like how early we said that I love you, and you know, we've always kind of had that view of you know, it being like something different. But we also met in high school we met like January of senior year, and we started dating in February. And I think before February was over, we said that, or we both did. We both said I love you, and it was like a really weird thing because it kind of came all at once, like very unexpected. And you know, I remember like I think it was like literally like 2 weeks after we started dating. Like I was supposed to leave. I was like going on a college visit somewhere that I like really wanted to go, and I was like super excited about it. And then I was like saying goodbye, and it was like literally right before we left. And I was just like, wait, like I don't want to go. Like I don't want to do this. I did go because I had to, but I remember like really just like it like hit me how much I didn't want to like leave her, and it was like, and at that moment I remember like in like this parking lot being like, I want to say I love you, and I was like, wait, I can't do that. We've been dating for 2 weeks. I remember like then I went on this trip and I was like so excited about it before. I was like had a horrible time. It was February in Indiana, so it wasn't really like a great time, I guess, to go there. But I remember coming back and like talking to my buddy, and I was like, you know, like I love her. Like, what is going on? And he was like, you can't say that. Like, you can't do it. Like, it's weird. Like, don't do it. And then I did it anyway, and it worked out. So you know, that's not exactly marriage, but like realizing that it was like a really like something totally different and like unexpected, like was like very early. Not saying that's what everyone's experience has been like, but that was just you know, for us. So yeah.
Kind of the same for us. I think we talked about it a lot, you know, probably for 3 or 4 years before we got married.
I think we avoided the term marriage, but we would talk about like kids and our life together more.
Definitely. But to kind of jump on you on top of that, when we first started dating, it was like, I don't know, a few months into our relationship, my mom asked me like about Anna. I was like, you know, who is she? And I like sat her down and I was like, Mom, like she's like special. She's gonna be in my life for a long time. And I don't know if Anna knew that at the time, but I was like, I'm not letting her go. There's no way. So I had that feeling it like pretty early on, a couple months in, like you said. We probably talked about it year in. We started talking about what we wanted in our life and future. But yeah, we definitely avoided the word marriage for a long time. But
I don't know if you saw in the audience, but we had a look just now where like we don't know when we started talking about marriage. So, but actually,
I
Do you
feel like it
know?
was like the beginning of the year, and then we got engaged in like October.
That sounds about right. So probably that year. But actually, I'm going to do a further throwback to when we were still friends. So we were talking about vocations. We had like a really private conversation about like vocation because Elizabeth was like really feeling this like almost pressure to like be a nun from like a lot of other people in her life. Really said you should be a nun, you should be a nun, you should be a nun, all this stuff. And we had like a really in-depth conversation about that and just discussing sort of what that means, even just as friends. And I kind of shared something that I'd sort of discovered at some point in time is that for me, in considering a call to the priesthood or just like the openness to being a priest or something like that, or religious life, that to me it almost felt like I was running away from my calling if I wanted to do that versus like something that was much harder, which is like committing to one person and being entirely vulnerable to one person. Like, no, if I'm like a priest, I can kind of just be like up here at the pulpit and like, you know, kind of this sort of stuff, be a little bit more separate from the flock, that sort of thing. But like, yeah, that was almost like the mentality, and it felt wrong for me. But it's like we kind of like had this like kind of in-depth conversation as friends that I think, looking back, really framed sort of how I saw our dating relationship, even because I knew that we both were looking for what their calling was, and so I think that was. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but that's perhaps the first time we discussed marriage.
Awesome. Lewis makes a distinction between gift love and need love. In what ways have you found yourself, and perhaps surprisingly, needing, and when I say that, I mean like, you know, I don't need cuddles, but they're nice, right? Find yourself perhaps surprisingly needing your beloved for time, attention, affection, etc.
This will be a quick one. I've learned that in marriage that there's no one who gets hurt more by your own like just baggage than the person you're married to, and just anything you do can affect said person, and that was like the thing. So like what I sort of learned at some point in time is that going to Elizabeth in those moments has actually been much better for me feeling better later on. If I encounter some sort of like either like just a sin or something like that that I'm upset with myself for, or just like I did something stupid at work or something like that, or just I don't know, Elizabeth, I ate like 5 donuts today. Like just things like that, like have been like weirdly healing, I guess, to be able to come to you and just kind of talk with you about random things like that that I prior have not, just never shared. Just been like whatever, I'll get over it in like 5 days.
Yeah, I think in terms of need love, like, I mean, you can gain from the story that Mike told you is from the beginning, we were like very, very close. And, you know, all throughout college and even now, like we've always wanted to just like be together, like spend as much time as possible together. You know, constantly wanting to like we went to different colleges, constantly wanting to like visit each other, talk on the phone, all that stuff. But I think that the line that needs to be towed with like need love is, yeah, there's a need to, you know, you need the other person for comfort, or, you know, you go to them with all of your wants and desires, but not letting it become a taking, and becoming it like about me and, oh, like you need to be there for me, but having it remain a self-giving love. I think that is the challenge.
I might look at it a little bit differently. I mean, those are all good too, but I think when I need love most is probably when I want it least, or like maybe I, you know, I get in my head, or I have to get like all the chores done in the house, and I won't take no for an answer from anyone. And that's where I feel like Tyler has to step up and know that I actually need help, and I need him to show me love in those moments. And so I think there's like that gift of that other person might not even know what they need, but that person is then there to support them and to show them that love that they actually do need. And that can kind of help bring you together and kind of, you know, I guess put you guys in balance in a way.
Eros typically does not count the cost or think in logical terms. What is a ridiculous or stupid thing you've done before out of love for your beloved that was spontaneous and without effort at the time? I'm gonna put Mike on the spot because I think there's just like a great example here that he told me just a couple days before.
Sorry, yeah, we talked about this like a couple days ago, so Phil knew this story. So our first date was in a blizzard, and it was like, you know, finally, like, whatever, like, I got up the courage to ask her out, And then all of a sudden, like one of the worst blizzards in the area in like years. It's still like the worst blizzard that I even remember. And I had to drive to this date, and I was like, I remember my dad coming in to like my room before I left, and he's like, "Oh, like it's gonna be pretty bad out there. Like, you sure you're still gonna go?" And I was like, "Yes." I was like, don't, like, not even a question. But it was like it was really ridiculous because like you couldn't even see like a foot in front of the car. Like it was really bad. And I mean, like, obviously, since I'm Catholic, there's things that I fear much worse than death. So, like, if we were to have died, it would have been okay. But, like, I wouldn't want to have, like, missed my, like, future spouse. So, like, you got to weigh those things. So, yeah, that was just absolutely ridiculous. I don't recommend that, but it worked out, so.
Can you share about a time, perhaps the first time, that it wasn't easy or leisurely to be loved by your beloved? And then how did you persevere and decide to keep loving them, if applicable?
When Steven and I started our relationship, we had to do 9 months of long distance. So it kind of started out hard in a way. And the hard thing for me was having to miss out on stuff so I could call him every day. And then Steven's really bad at phone calls. So I would like leave my fun group of friends that I was hanging out with to go sit in the hall and call someone who I would go through my whole day, and then I would finish talking and he would have no response. And then I'd be like, "How was your day?" And it would be like, "Fine." And this was every day for 9 months. And then he went to Spain, and so there was an 8-hour time difference. And so I was staying up to like 2 in the morning to Skype with him, and then I would get up for my summer job at like 7. And so it was
And I wasn't better at talking during that time either.
That's true. And that was challenging. And I will say, like, towards the end of that 9 months, I was wondering if it was worth it to keep it up. But then Steven came home early from Spain and surprised me for my birthday, and I was like, okay, like I can do this again. But but yeah, it was
I got better.
challenging, and he got a lot better. And I'm glad that I did it, because now I've had a lot more years of really good times with Steven than those 9 months that were challenging.
I think that, well, it sounds like all of the couples up here have been together for quite a while. So I was just going to say one of the, not in a particular moment, but one of the challenging things I feel like of meeting young and starting dating like in high school is like you each have to grow separately, but like growing together and respecting each other like in that growth process. And as you're learning to like figure out the world, it can be challenging. And so I think that was just something that, was tough to deal with as a couple, like growing together.
Yeah, kind of like follow off like what you were saying, also something that you said earlier, but like it does, like it's not like it's not easy, I wouldn't say, but it's not like a hard choice at the same time to like be like, oh, am I gonna do like make this life choice or that life choice? I can take this job or that job. Like it's never really a question, right? Like if you're like, for us, like which grad school did we want to go to? Like, oh, it was like we both got into this one that was close. It was the same one. Like we're gonna go there. That's not a question. Like it's not even a consideration anymore. It was just like the automatic choice because like I love you and that's like what I want my life to be like. And there's things that are more important than like any of this other like stuff that we do on the side, like which is life, like so it's like it is hard and like it takes work. Maybe it's more like effortful. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but it's like the choice is always easy, which is something that you said earlier. So just kind of reiterate that point.
How has loving your beloved taught you more about yourself, and perhaps particularly about your masculinity or femininity?
You're my friend, Phil. I got to do this for you. Okay. So in terms of like masculinity and femininity, like there's a lot of like you got to kind of wade through there because there's like the cultural masculinity, femininity, and then like what we as Catholics actually believe that masculinity and femininity is, and they're like definitely not the same thing all the time. Like I don't like talking about sports, so like I'm not very masculine that way. But like, you know, that doesn't mean that, whatever. I'm not going to tangent. But one of the like definitions of or ways to look at masculinity and femininity that I like is something that T.S. Eliot wrote about. So in his book, The Cocktail Party, or like play, I guess, it's all about how like the thing that men fear most and want most is to be able to love, to get like to give their love to somebody else, and that's like also like a fear, like kind of like a not in like a physical way, but like an impotence is the fear, but like wanting to actually like love somebody else. And for women, it's like, can they be loved? And obviously, this is just T.S. Eliot's like specific view, and it's like one thing. But I think like what like being together has taught me is like just like she has like let me be like good. I don't know, this is a weird way to say it. Like let me be like let me love her well. I don't know if that makes sense, but like that's never like a fear. And I feel like that part of like my masculinity, if you want to say that, has been like really like kind of like flourished in our relationship. So kind of just like enabling your partner to do that was something that I feel like I learned a little bit.
I don't know if I can touch on the masculinity, femininity side of it as well, but I would say just in general, I think being with Tyler has taught me just most about myself, just because even I think like we were talking about earlier, like you're comfortable with that person, you can talk with that person. Like Tyler's, I feel like not the only person, but he's the person I trust most to question me and to challenge me and to push me in different ways that maybe I, in my head, always thought was right. And so, in that way, he sees me in his own light, and I see myself in my own light, and we're also one together. And so I think, you know, we can each pull out different aspects of the other person that maybe were blind to us before because we weren't that person before we were together. So I think it can come out that way.
Yeah, so being married to Elizabeth and sort of like learning how to externalize my thoughts. I keep most of my thoughts interior. I don't really share them usually or anything like real serious with other people so much. I kind of like just chat about nothing with people. But like being married to Elizabeth, I learned that wasn't enough. And so I've had to like externalize thoughts, which has helped me to learn so much about myself, because I don't think you just get in the habit of just, this is how you think, this is how you do things, this is how this has happened. So having some way of externalizing that, or even just realizing how not good I was at externalizing my thought processes, has been super eye-opening, and I've realized all sorts of like both the really good things that I've been able to do or that I can do, and then the really bad things that I'm just like, oh, well, I've always wanted to do this thing but never actually do that thing, or just like, this is how I come across to people, or just other sorts of things that have been interesting, because we have very different personalities, and sort of, I think, when you rub those against each other, like, you get a lot of friction, and you learn like all the different things in which you're like either deficient or like superior. So they kind of, I've learned a lot about myself in that sort of process of externalizing and just talking about things. So
yeah, I still don't know how to answer the masculinity femininity part. I'm sorry, but I think the thing that has challenged me the most and has like helped me grow the most, particularly with Steven and our relationship, has been I used to like think of myself in like my value in terms of what I could do for everyone else, and even more so in how little I could burden anybody else. I was used to taking care of myself and everyone and not asking for anything. And Steven likes to help and likes to do things and likes to come through for people. And so being married to him, and he also likes to relax. So being married to him, I've learned to not put so much value into what I can and can't do. And I've had different challenges with my health through our marriage as well, and that's really forced me to come to terms with what I can't do and with needing help, and Steven has always been there to step up and help me over and over and over again, and I keep thinking he'll get tired of me and tired of doing it, and he just doesn't, and it's really stretching my sense of value and where it comes from.
if I wasn't married to Elizabeth, I wouldn't be on this panel. So I would very, very safely be in the back row.
Great. That's like more or less all the questions I have. I don't know if we have more time. Sure. Does anyone, what's that? Okay. Does anyone have any questions that they want to ask the panelists? Father.
I'm kind of just interested in the role of faith in your relationship and how that might have changed through time, and how you might have influenced each other, or how it helps you, continues to help you as well.
I have a little something. I don't know. Mine's not fully formed. Do you want to go ahead first?
Well, mine was just going to kind of jump off the last point that I made, where I think just being in a relationship with Steven and seeing how he serves me and takes care of me and loves me every day, regardless of what I'm capable of that day or how much I ask help for that day, has changed the way I think about God, because this is a kind of love that I've never experienced before. So it's just giving me a bigger perspective on God, which shapes my faith life.
I have, like, certain parts of like of teachings of Jesus and other things like that have rung true more so in marriage than I thought they ever really could. And I don't have a lot of like specifics, but one of the ones that like I think has really been something that I've experienced has been Jesus saying, "This is my body given up for you." Because there's been, like, Elizabeth kind of mentioned that she's had like some chronic issues and stuff like that, and oftentimes it just requires me to give her a foot rub when I don't want to. Or a back rub or something like that, really help her out with some of the aches and pains and stuff like that. And like sometimes it hurts me to do that, but like not as much as it would hurt Elizabeth for me not to do that. But it's like certain aspects like that have kind of really rung true in a more actually tangible way that I think has been really interesting. Also, I didn't pray novenas until I was dating Elizabeth, because I didn't realize that was just a thing people did sometimes. So in that way, that has been an improvement for sure.
Yeah, I think the role of faith in our relationship has definitely changed since we started dating, and it's been like a pretty big change. Well, we went to Catholic school. You know, we've always been Catholic, but we started dating in high school, so like, some high schoolers have a pretty good faith life, but like we were pretty typical in the sense, we would go to mass, but like it wasn't really a big part of our lives. And then, we went through college and kind of similar, we were still Catholic and we were still going to church and everything, but we wouldn't really talk about faith at all, and we weren't really living out the teachings of the faith. But towards the end of college, that all kind of changed, and we both went through like a reversion, and I would say I started to go through that first, just kind of being sparked by like Catholic people, Catholic YouTubers, and I was like watching all these videos and reading all of this stuff, and I took some classes in college that really influenced my faith life, and then Mike kind of went through like a similar experience. And so obviously now faith is super important to us, and I think that the way our relationship functions has changed dramatically since we've had faith at the center, and had God at the center of our life, because it's no longer about us. It's more focused on loving God first. So that's definitely been important.
Yeah, just to like kind of add on to what Mary already said, like God has worked like through Mary in my life in so many different ways, and I think that's like something that's the most beautiful thing about what I love about our relationship, is like how God works through you and in our relationship in this way, that like I don't know, like I am so like floored by people who are like single and are like really faithful Catholics, like many of you guys, because like I know like I don't know where I would be right now if it wasn't for her. And for all of the I don't know if you guys know like the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, but like there's the whole joke about like how like the man's the head and the woman is the neck and it can move the head wherever she wants. Well, like in spiritual sense, that's sort of like our relationship. Like Mary has kind of been like the leader in our like spiritual, our relationship with God, in many ways, and just like seeing how like now how much better our like lives are and how much better our relationship is. When we keep that faith at the center, like, of our days, like structurally in our days and in like what we do together, has been like obviously like a big it is gone from being something that was kind of just like peripheral to being like the center of our relationship, and it's done wonders and stuff. So that's all.
So I guess Tyler and I probably have a slightly different perspective because Tyler's not Catholic, and so that was never an issue for me. And he's actually always been really supportive of me being Catholic, and he's always been very encouraging of my faith and going to church. And at the same time, he's also not put pressure on it, maybe that's the wrong word, or but he always makes me want to be as good as I can in my faith, so that way I can answer a question that comes up. Or things that maybe seemed different than to him because he was never raised in a Catholic church, and things that are normal, like even kneeling at church, are not normal for someone who does not kneel when they go to church. And so even from the very start, he was always really good about wanting to go to church and being there to support me through it. And so I think it's kind of a different perspective, but even the fact that he isn't Catholic, he still supports me in my faith in a number of ways that are incredible. So. Well, I didn't want to put pressure on you,
I was gonna say similar, but like she said, not Catholic. So growing up, I was like pretty in and out of church sometimes with family. It depended if they wanted to go or not. So non-existent really before I met Anna. And so mainly my goal was to learn as much as I could when I first started dating her, and was like, why do you do this church thing? Like every Sunday, what is it about? And so, yeah, that's been my goal the whole time, is support it. And then now I'm pretty much Catholic at this point. I'm here more often than a lot of people.
I never thought you would be.
And I never thought I would be. And but yeah, I mean, pray before meals and all that stuff is all new for me, and that's something that we value in our relationship together. So, yeah.
Did we have another question? All right, cool. Okay, cool, great. To touch on something that Mike and Mary said, so my best friend got married just a couple of weeks ago. I was his best man, and I shared a story, just a very brief thing, but I had brought Dan and Joanna, those are their names, and Mike and Mary together for a meal. And so I was like fifth wheeling, and we were just like talking about the faith, and it's really like beautiful seeing, particularly because I know Mike and Mary, how their faith life has grown as they've been dating each other. And something that my best friend's now wife said, Joanna, and I had mentioned this in the best man speech, is she said that I think Mary, you had asked her something along the lines of like basically like what was the role of faith in your guys' relationship, and she said, I realized that we were happiest when we were practicing our faith together. So great, let's just end on that note. I think that's really beautiful, and thanks for your time and attention.
Everyone could just get your chair and put it over there, and then you can